Truth is setting us free. This is a podcast for those of us who want to be set free. Is that you? The basis for most religions is the practice of spiritual principles. However, in the name of religion, wars are being waged across the planet. The intention of this podcast is to take a step above religion by creating a personal relationship with Spirit, or the God of your understanding. These are some of the principles that are setting me and others free. Principles like peace, joy, gratitude, acceptance, patience, tolerance, forgiveness, compassion, and empathy, just to name a few. See if you can identify yourself in the stories that follow and how some of the most inspirational people in my life are practicing these principles and being set free. See if you can be set free through the practice of spiritual principles. I invite you to enjoy what follows. Good afternoon, Barry. Great to see you. It's been a while, and
Yes.
I love that beard you are wearing today and that hat.
All right.
So this is a podcast about spiritual principles, and my intention is to give people an example of how you can use spiritual principles, how it is embodied in your own life. And this idea came to me because many people have a misconception about what spiritual principles are in the first place, or they know not what spiritual principles are anyway, And so what I want to do is give people an option to look for truth, because to me, the spiritual principles never change and they're universal. And as we apply them to our lives, we experience freedom in a way that we never dreamed possible. And so this is the impetus for putting this podcast together. And I'm inviting people who are inspirational to me. And I believe that you and others who have already shared are inspirational in your own right, So I am blessed to have you here today, and I'm believing you'll be a blessing to all who hear what it is that you have to share in that regard. So the spiritual principle that we agreed upon is resilience, and resilience is a powerful principle. I believe that all principles fall out of the principle of love, and resilience is one of those that continues to be part of my practice in spirituality. So I want to have you introduce yourself, and then I'll give you a brief definition of resilience to get the ball rolling. So with that, please introduce yourself to the community.
I sure will. I sure will. So my name is Barry Sermons, and some people call me Barry S. And most young people call me Uncle Barry. I'm going to get a couple of things Out front, I am 34 years clean and sober. IV for 20 years. My birthday was March 9th, which is a couple of weeks ago now. Whenever you see this, it was March 9th, 2024. I turned 65. I'm not going to break out my Medicare card, but I'm going to break it out. I was diagnosed on my birthday exactly 20 years prior. So this is a significant mile marker for me. So now that I got that stuff out of the way, let me just tell you who I am just real briefly. I'm a kind of person that I believe in helping other people. And, I got that from my Uncle Leroy, from my mother, both my grandmothers, Maddie and Meldis, Maddie Thomas, who became Uncle, married my grandfather, and then Melda Haynes. So those are the people that kind of showed me how to help other people. At my grandparents' house, people would come in and they would get something to eat, no matter what. And all of those people I just mentioned, my mother is still living, but whenever I hear people talk about them, they say great things. I look like my dad. People can tell I'm my dad. But when I go back to Somerville, New Jersey, it never fails. Somebody says to me, "Oh man, Jim Sermons, he gave me my first job," or he gave my mother a chance because he was an HR person, and he was all about hiring Black folks. This is back in the civil rights era. So, how I usually introduce myself. Let me just kind of bring it down here. It's not that serious, Barry. This is just life. My name's Barry Sermons. I am a healthcare and civil rights advocate.
And you said that you were living with HIV for how long now?
On my birthday, March 9th, it was 20 years.
20
well,
years.
I tested positive earlier than that, but the diagnosis is 20 years.
I got you. Got you. So I want to give you a brief definition of resilience and ask then, how do you resonate with this definition? And we'll go from there. Resilience is the ability to adapt and bounce back from adversity, trauma, or challenges in life. What do you think about that?
Are you looking in Wikipedia or the dictionary? Is my picture next to that one?
No, my picture actually, but
Okay,
anyway.
all right. So there's some other pictures up there.
Yeah.
Yes, and bouncing back is what we do, and I am so grateful that I have this thing called grace.
Grace.
This thing, yes, and I'm trying to get. It's funny because grace is one of those words that's hard for me to put down, and kind of pin down. But my definition of grace is receiving a gift from the Most High that I don't necessarily, I didn't do anything to get it. I don't necessarily deserve it. I didn't necessarily figure it out. It was just freely given to me. And there's a saying, but for the grace of God, there go I. So I'm supposed to be telling you about what resilience means. And I understand that this is going to be, this interview is going to go on a little bit. So I'm just going to interject some things along the way. But one of the major hurdles that I had to bounce back from, that I had to adapt to, was I talked about my dad, Jim Sermons. Well, I was a sophomore in high school, and he was out on a business trip helping people. He had an aneurysm. He came back. He lived on life support for 3 days. And in May May 5th, 1975, my dad passed away. I was a sophomore in high school. I was lost. So here's what's important for me. I got some superheroes behind me, right? My
Mm-hmm.
dad was a superhero. And in my mind, he was bigger than life. But for other people, he was a superhero. And so I talk about the Most High. And because I'm in a 12-step program, we talk about a higher power. My dad was my higher power. And my higher power was now gone. And I didn't know, I had no idea what to do. But his friends came around and they were like, "You're the man of the house now." And it's like, I'm 15 years old. I'm like, what does that even mean? What does that even mean? And so, I embarked on a journey that it took me 15 years to actually bounce back from that. And I'll just kind of cut to what, they say what it was like, what happened. So here's what it was like. Because my dad had friends and they used to have Super Bowl parties and people over, and the people I thought were cool, guys who would bring a fifth over, and they would do this thing where they would go and bang the table. And I thought that was being a man. So I from the moment I was in that hospital room and one of my aunts put a Valium in my mouth because I was crying in the hospital room when my dad was on life support. And they told me, "Cut out that crying. You need to be strong for him." I went, they kicked me out of the room. I went in the hallway. They put a Valium in my mouth. And what I learned in that moment was if I had the right combination, I did not have to feel those feelings. So it took me 15 years from then until I was 30 years old to figure out and to bounce back from that trauma. Bounce back enough so that I can move on with my life in a productive way. And I still deal with the trauma. My birthday, like I said, is March 9th. Typically, between March 9th and May 5th is a tumultuous time of year for me. Now there's more joy and rejoicing and positivity in that time period. But, for those 15 years from, 15 to 30, it wasn't, it wasn't pretty, as they say. And it wasn't till it might have been 10 years ago now. So that means I was like 50, 55 years old. And there was a whole bunch, it was May 5th, and there was all these people out, and there's this big restaurant, this Mexican restaurant around the corner from my house at the plaza. And I went up there and I was like, what are all these cars and all these people running around with beers, margaritas, and all this stuff? And somebody said, "Well, it's Cinco de Mayo." I had no clue that May 5th was a holiday. Because for me, for a long time, May 5th was not a holiday. All right, so that's the first thing I bounced back from. I'm a listen for a minute, and like you said, this is not a monologue. This is a conversation.
Yes, it is. So my first question is, how does resilience fit into the larger framework of spiritual principles? How does it sit with
How does
other
it sit?
principles?
Okay, so I'm going to go with you and love being the major, um, the the primary or the original spiritual principle. I believe God is love, and whatever you call him, I call him the Most High, um, love. And so from that springs all other things, or all other things are possible through love. And I do want to acknowledge the few principles in the beginning of the 12 steps, which is honesty, and saying that dad died and my life went crazy. And then running into people, and one of my good friends who I've known for about 30 years, he's in recovery as well. His dad died and his life got crazy. So when you're talking about the first step, it's like I identified it there's a problem, that something's gone awry and my life is crazy. And then the second thing that comes up is, there might be a solution. And then the third step is that I turn my will and turn my life, or in some cases, I turn this one situation over because I can handle the rest of it. And I turn something over and I trust that I is love and that I'm in line with that, even though it doesn't look like that all the time. So, and I wanted to go back to those three because it is my belief that everything, I was going to say everything's going to be all right. Everything is all right. Everything is in divine order. And when I don't think so, it's in divine order. When I don't like it, it's in divine order. And I find out that sometimes the tragedies and the bad times in my life turn out to be the times when I grow the most.
Mm-hmm.
And
I
so
can resonate with that.
Let me just finish this one thought.
Mm-hmm.
So I trust, and that means that when challenges come, I bounce back, because at 10 o'clock at night, when things look the worst, it may be dark. It may be darkest before the dawn, but joy cometh in the morning. And I believe that. And that's why I go to bed at 10 o'clock. When I feel terrible, I say, Barry, it's time to go lay down. All right. So back to you.
Okay. I resonate with that. Is resilience an innate quality? Meaning, is it something that we're born with, so to speak? Or can it be learned and developed?
It's interesting. I'm going to say it was instilled in me because I'm stubborn, and I'm a technical person, right? And I was a kid and I was always going to figure it out. And I would be up all night long, supposed to be asleep so I can go to school, and I am figuring something out, and that, I guess, resilient and perseverance kind of go together. It's like, I'm like, all right, I'm gonna figure this out. And then some experiment wouldn't work, and I would just bounce back and say, all right, well, that one didn't work. It's funny because, I say that an experiment didn't work, but actually every experiment works. Sometimes I learn, oh, this doesn't give me the result I was looking for. And if I keep going through things that don't give me the result I look for, then one time I stumble over, I say, this is it. This is it. But, about being inherent, um, I, I, I think environmentally, I got a lot too. I talked about my mother, Barbara Sermons. I talked about my dad, Jim Sermons. I talk about his sisters, specifically Aunt Evelyn. Aunt Evelyn, she was she's got a library named after her. Okay. She was on a board of a hospital for a bunch of years, a real giant in my life. And the other sisters too, but I'm just mentioning her. And there's and Uncle Leroy. I want to acknowledge Uncle Leroy. He was a civil rights advocate, and Uncle Leroy, and watching their examples and watching the March on Washington in the 60s, and watching, the all of the hoses being turned on people, and all of the trauma that was on TV when America found out how Black people were treated, especially in the South. He would just bounce back up and get up the next day, and it was time to advocate some more. It's like, so I had great examples. I think I inherently had resilience, but I had great examples, and so I think it goes both ways.
Okay. So what I'm also hearing too is that um, with the combination of the two, that I'm hearing you say that you were more invested in resilience as a result of the examples that were placed before you, and
Mm.
that having those examples, so finding those examples in your um, community, in your family,
Mhm.
actually gave you the opportunity to develop resilience within yourself, which was already a seed that was planted based
Mm.
on the relationships that you had through family and others. Would you say that that's true?
Right. Yeah, I would say that is true, and you're very observant. Since I've been in recovery, I've been in therapy, and, and it's like if my therapist will do just like what you do. It'd be like, well, what I hear you saying, and I'd be like, yeah, yeah, actually. So yes, yeah, the seeds were planted, and I'm gonna say it this way, and I can say this today and not feel like it means conceit or it means like I'm full of myself. I am a brilliant person, and I was surrounded. I believe that the Most High picked all of those people to be around me and all of those situations to happen to me so I could be the person I am right now in this moment, in this conversation. The things about being brilliant, I told you about Aunt Evelyn. She was the librarian for the whole county. And I had a first grade teacher, and this happens, right? This happens a lot. A young black kid will be labeled unruly or something in the classroom that needs to be either medicated or incarcerated. And I was in first grade, and I used to there's this thing we call the eraser tag. You put an eraser on your head, and it reminds me of Ghana actually. And you put an eraser on your head, and you move around the room, and somebody's it. And if they tag you, you're out. Or if the eraser falls off your head, you're out. And I was killing it. And this teacher, she didn't like that part, but the teacher would go to the principal and say that, oh, he's a disruption to class, and he doesn't. She had all these complaints about me. So my parents took me to a therapist, and the therapist said that there's nothing wrong with your son. Matter of fact, I bet you when he gets to second grade and she's no longer your teacher or his teacher, he's going to be okay. But I was telling you about Aunt Evelyn. During that exchange, Aunt Evelyn went to the county records of the basic skills tests that people took. And I had the highest score in the county. I was brilliant, and she just couldn't handle my brilliance. So the seed was planted, but you have to have fertile soil for things to grow. And then you have to have somebody that tills the soil and waters the plant. And some of that I did, some of that God did, some of that, I didn't make it rain, but I turned over the soil after it did.
You know, I'm seeing some importance in the practice of resilience as you're describing it. So, my next question is, why is resilience important to our spiritual practice and our general well being? Why is it?
So why I think resilience is important to my being and to other people's being is, and I there are slogans and there are sayings that I've heard over through my life, and I didn't make any of these up, but they mean a lot to me. And one of them is, don't quit 5 minutes before the miracle.
Mm.
Yeah. So if things look bad, and like for me, after 10 o'clock at night, that is my rule. If things look bad at 10 o'clock at night, that means put your pajamas on and get into bed, Barry, and don't let it maul around in your head, and don't make any rash decisions or write any letters, and get up in the morning, and things are changed. But so what the resilience and the perseverance and the patience gives me is the ability to make it through when it looks dark and when it looks bad. And like I was telling you, I'm a technical person, and I like to figure things out. And 3 o'clock in the morning is kind of like my magic moment. I will wake up 3 o'clock in the morning, and I've got a whiteboard in my little office, and I will go in there and I'll be, or I'll get a piece of paper and I'll write out something or type out something. And then once I get it all out of me, I go back to bed and lay back down. It's like 3 o'clock in the morning. What are you doing up? And and that is my resilience coming through. That is me bouncing back. Or here's another thing I think that I have to call it: peeking through. Sometimes there's a veil over my life, a veil over my spirit, and a veil over things where I can't really see well. It's like it's a dark room,
Hmm.
and I'm feeling my way around. And then all of a sudden, even if it's still dark, I can feel that there's a piano over there in the corner. Right now, I can see it. But if I move around this room, I'm like, oh, that's a grand piano over there. Matter of fact, I gotta get this in now. I am in the room where I have film class. I have gone back to school after 30 years of being in school. And I'm in this film program at Georgia State University. And this is the room where I have my film classes. And I just knew to come in here because this is a comfortable and great space for me. And there's another step and another principle of amends. And in that process of amends, people can heal and people can see forward, and it doesn't look dark all the time. And so that kid who lost his dad as a sophomore in high school went off to college thinking that, you know, a fifth of gin was a solution. I was able to make it through that time, but they asked me not to come back to Stockton State College. I didn't do that well. Right now, I'm making amends to Barry. This is my second semester back. My first semester, I got 3 A's. I told you I'm brilliant. I'm just reminding myself that I am. Reminding myself I'm doing very well this semester. And in the summer, which will be my third semester, I will spend 4 weeks in South Africa, 1 week in Johannesburg, 3 weeks in Cape Town, and I'll get 9 credits for that semester towards my degree. So I said, peeking through to see another solution and bouncing back from the guy. Matter of fact, when I applied for school and I had to get all those transcripts in, and I looked at those transcripts, man, I felt so much shame. And now there's a line, here's another line. No matter how far down the scale I have gone, I can see how my experience can benefit others.
Hmm. And I think this is such an important message for the youth because right now they're being challenged. We've got all of these distractions and all of the things that have been brought into their experience as a result of social media and how uh, having attention any way you can get it is a thing for the youth currently. And part of the reason why I wanted to bring people like yourself to this conversation was to remind them of their brilliance, because they are absolutely brilliant and the people that will guide the human race into our next level of evolution.
Mm.
And they need to know that they have the power to do that regardless of the appearances. You know, there's also another saying, keep coming back.
Mm.
And what I'm hearing you say also is that in spite of what looked like um, a negative experience, you kept coming back until you were able to make the amends to yourself and to whatever the power is that you refer to as the God of your understanding, by showing up and for your own life, and thereby opening up the opportunity to be present in the
Mm.
lives of those people who may not have a clue
Mm-hmm.
that those things um, behind them does not dictate
Mm.
what their future has to look like. So
Yeah.
I'm grateful that you gave us that example. And I'm sure other people hearing this will be inspired by just that part of your message. But my next question is, what are some of the ways we can cultivate resilience in ourselves and others?
Mm. Okay. Well, what, talking about the principle of honesty, um, is speaking honestly about things. I suffer from this head trying to shame me about my past. And my niece, she gave me this saying, I don't know where it was, on Facebook or somewhere she put it. She said, "Don't judge me by my past. I don't live there anymore." So I guess the ways that I pass this on is, through, I talk about, being Uncle Barry, right? So Uncle Leroy taught me how to be there for people because he was there for me. And whenever I'm dealing with nieces and nephews or young people, I think to myself, what would Uncle Leroy do in this situation? And I want to model and be just like him. So, that's one thing. And so, excuse me, I have a nephew. I have a nephew, Asa. He's a baseball player, and he's a real good baseball player. He's a base runner. He can hit, he can pitch, he can field, he can do all kinds of things. And he came and a he spent a week with me during the summer to go to a baseball camp here in Atlanta. And I remember the first day, there was some problem with the field or something, and it was hot that day. And he got in the car after camp was over, so he stayed at my house, and I would take him to camp, in the morning, 8 o'clock, and then I'd pick him up about 3 or something. He gets in, and oh man, he was like not happy, and we're not even doing baseball drills, and we're doing this and doing that, and I was like, well, you might want to hang in there, and it might be different tomorrow. I shared that with him, and and then we got his dad on the phone, and his dad knows how to. His dad has language, like my dad had language that spoke to me. His dad has language that speaks to him, and he has this term. It's called flush it. And when my dad was the baseball coach, you'd miss a play or you'd strike out or you'd do something, and there'd be some poo-poo that you left, and he would just say, "Flush it and come back to now." No. So that's one. And then the other thing, I'm gonna go back to being here at school. I am there are a few of us that are in this program called GSU 62. Um, but most of the people I interact with, other than the professors who are usually younger than me too, they're one third my age. I was just down on campus. I got a flat tire here, right? So I persevered. It was an amazing day because I showed up here on time for this interview, despite all the stuff that life threw at me. But I was in this room and we were doing mindfulness meditation. And I heard this one kid, he was like, yeah, yeah, and I'll be graduating soon. I'll be 22. I'll be old when I graduate. I'm like, and so,
All a matter of perspective, huh?
yes, it is. Yes, it is. So, my goal is just is to be the bridge from civil rights, you know, to them, and also from their experience back to me, so I
Mhm.
can see what's possible.
I
I hope
like
I
that.
answered the question.
Yeah. Yeah. The question was, how do we cultivate resilience? Um, what can we learn from the challenges of adversity um, in the face of life situations? I think you've already uh, hinted at some of the things
Mhm.
that are possible. But we're talking about, when we talk about spiritual principles, we're talking about unlimited possibilities,
Yes.
and so there are things that we might not have even considered as possible,
Mhm.
except through the experience, the strength, and hope of those people that came before us. Um, but how can challenges, especially as we focus on the youth, how can we take some of the things that are challenging to our youth today and open up new possibilities for them and for us, like you said?
Mhm. Mhm. Well, the first thing, in order to get to youth, and that's why I'm here in this college setting, is because you got to be in the room with them. And I remember when I was young, listening to Parliament Funkadelic and the music that we listened to, and
Who?
the older folks, yeah, go back to go back to P Funk. And, matter of fact, I'm from Plainfield, New Jersey, and that's where P Funk started. So okay, I got it honest. But the older generation historically complains about the younger generation. Their music's too loud, there's too much cursing, there's too much sexuality into it. Why don't they pull their pants up? Just we got all these complaints, right? And it's hard to connect with people when I'm judging them. I need to be able to see people where they are, and what is it about, this kid? Did his dad die when he was young? Or did he have, you know, role models that were, pimps, players, and drug pushers? You know, why does he think the way he thinks, or he or she, or why do they act the way they act? And you talked about social media. You see all kinds of stuff on social media, and somebody thinks it's real cool to walk up behind somebody and sucker punch them because they saw somebody else do it on Facebook or whatever. But I think that's that is the way that I try to connect, is I try to hear what it is they're saying, and hear what their challenges are, and for me, I have to remember who I was when I was 22 years old, and I knew everything and couldn't hear anything anybody was saying, and you just don't understand, and who's been around 60 years. How me, I've been around 18, and let me school you. I just think I think being able to listen and having empathy for where a person is, and that's one of my, talking about superheroes, superpowers is well, it's a two-edged sword. I have empathy for people. I can feel what people are going through. What I mean by it being a two-edged sword, there are times when I try to fix things for other people that are not mine to fix for them. And I move from giving care to them to caretaking for them. And when I caretake for somebody, I stop them from growing.
Mm-hmm.
So if somebody's going through something, some kid or some adult, if I can listen and see what they're going through, I can say, yeah, I remember when that happened to me. This is what I did. But I tell you what, if you ever want to talk about it, or if you ever want to just sit around with somebody and not talk about it, give me a call.
Mm-hmm. You bring up a really important point. You started out by saying you have to be in the room with them. What most of our youth don't understand today is that because they grew up in social media
Mhm,
online,
mhm,
that and have been really isolated, they can't see the isolation.
mhm.
But when we grew up, for instance, we actually played in the street until it was time to come home when the lights came on.
When the street lights come on, you
That's
better
right.
be in the house.
You better be in the house, or uh, uh, somebody gonna be chasing after you with an iron cord or a switch. You know, on social media today, there's
Mhm,
no such way to make that kind of connection, that
mhm,
person to person connection, unless we create those spaces.
mhm,
You know, um, you're talking about how you've been able to connect with relatives and young people, but that is one of the things I believe may be affecting the youth in a negative way,
mhm,
because we haven't the ability to create those spaces generationally that allow us to pass valuable information from one generation to the next. And when you were 22, well, I was 16, by the way, when I knew everything.
Okay.
So you were a late bloomer.
Yeah,
But
obviously. I'll be the
but
fly.
our youth today, they still I think that time frame has expanded because uh, they've got access to the internet and all kinds of information that may or may not be true,
Hmm. Yeah.
because they're accepting Google as the truth.
Hmm.
They may be missing out on the reality of what it takes for us to not only survive, but to thrive in the face of the current conditions that we live in. All the disinformation and misinformation and fake news and
Hmm.
etc. And so we need something real that we can depend on. And these principles are the things that I depend on
Hmm.
and continue to depend on, even as I grow um, older and gracefully, you know.
Yeah.
Um, so I'm witnessing how getting out of my own way, like you said, there are things that you have tried to pass on to others that couldn't be passed on. But there are absolutely other things that can be. And so one of the things I've learned to do is to recognize what can be passed on, recognize what my part is, in living today and living in relationship to past generations, and future generations. The um, family that I grew up in was very different from the one that I have today. I have a family of choice, as most
Mhm.
of my relatives have passed away, you
Mhm.
know. So I'm grateful to still be in the game and connected to a larger community. And I believe that that's something that we can give our youth as an example, which you just described. How are there any spiritual teachings, or are there any spiritual teachings or practices that can help us build resilience? We're talking about spirituality and not necessarily religion.
Yeah. Before we move off the social media thing and the young people and them getting information from, Google and all that, and when I was down at the campus, there's a big symposium on how AI is affecting our community as well. So I just want to speak to the fact that, you know, computers are what they say thinking for people, but I disagree that the human being has to evaluate that information. And it's not just a matter of which is better, black or white, which is better, three or four, which is better, down. It's like, for me, I can say, in this case, which a computer just cannot say. And then the other thing that I wanted to talk about was screen time as well. And when I'm in a relationship with somebody and I'm looking down at my phone, there really is no relationship. There really is no relationship. And my example of, I care about you and I want to be in the space with you, um, put my phone down and turn it upside down so I can't see the screen. And I think that's one of the major things. I got on the bus yesterday. We went to a basketball game. And the first thing that did, I looked down the road. Everybody was in their phone. Everybody was in their phone. Um, so you asked me about teachers and practices, but I do want to show one thing if I can. That is a symbol. It's a Dinkra symbol. And that is my symbol. And it, I call it the resilience symbol, and it's twisting and turning, and it's a symbol representing the torturous nature of life's journey and the toughness and versatility and dynamism required to thrive in it. That is my symbol that I got when we went to Ghana 15 years ago. And my brother told me to look for this symbol called INSA. And I looked for INSA all over the place. And while I was there, I found, and I mispronounce it. I call it Nikiakio. But you're asking, and I just want to make sure I repeat the question. So you're asking me, what are the teachings and what are the practices that can support my resilience or support me spiritually? Is that correct?
And support the youth.
The youth.
I
So,
know that symbol as balance. That
yeah,
is the
okay. Okay.
yeah,
Okay. Yeah. 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 I like that one too.
yeah,
So, almost like yin yang, right? Um,
yes.
so the teachings, I told you I was down at the main campus for this it was like yoga and mindfulness. And the things that have helped me that I think will help other people, especially young people, is meditation. And so I have this routine in the morning. I call it wake, pray, read. And so when I wake up, I need to kind of thank, the fact that I was able to wake up that day by praying. And I have these daily reader things where I read something positive and something to reflect on. um, take time. At one point, I was up to 30 minutes, but 5 minutes is enough of clearing my mind and doing what I call meditation and mindful of the space I'm in, the sounds that are around me, the way the room feels, the way the chair feels, um, and just being present with myself. And I think if we could show an example of being present for younger people and they can be present for each other, I think that'll give them the techniques and that'll give them the practice of what it takes. Because I really think, and I don't think, the universe is an amazing place. Everything's connected. And when I line up and I speak into the universe a desire or a thing that I want to happen, stars line up and things start happening. You know, um, I think if young people knew that, let's say, if I knew that when you were 16 and I was 22, I might have taken a different path. you know, I might have taken some different choices, but I didn't know what I didn't know, and so I didn't have the meditation, I didn't have the patience. I didn't have um, I had to have something going on in my mind all the time. And for me, meditation doesn't mean that stuff stops going on in my mind. It's just that I kind of watch what goes on in my mind.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And as I watch it, I realize that, oh, well, just because it's going on in my mind doesn't mean I have to do it, or doesn't mean it's going to hurt me. Or I can just let it play out in my mind and let it rise and fall like the waves in an ocean. Tide comes in, tide goes out.
Yeah. I see it as clouds floating across
Mm,
a blue sky.
mm,
There are some clouds that I notice, and I can put energy into what I think it looks like based
mm,
on that formation, or I can just let it continue to flow.
mm,
That's a lot like what I experience when I project into the future. I recognize that none of that has to be true for me, especially if I'm projecting fear.
mm,
You know, um, I'm grateful to have a practice of meditation so that I can slow down my thinking and make that observation. I think what my higher power gives me is the ability to observe my actions and my thoughts and let me know that, like you pointed out, that none of that has to be true for me.
mm,
You know, I can, in fact, speak what I want into the universe. And as you mentioned, the stars will line up.
mm,
You know, one form of meditation that I do is through the breath.
mm,
I recognize that as I am taking a deep breath, my focus is on the breath. And it clears a lot of those old tapes.
mm,
You mentioned something about having those old ideas in the background. Yeah, for me, they continue to play in the background. That was then. This
mm,
is now.
mm,
And so today, what I get an opportunity to do is to recognize that they are old tapes, and I get an opportunity to choose a new, you know. meditation gives me the ability to do that. So I'm grateful that you're reminding me and the youth that there is a way to slow down those thoughts that seem to be overwhelming you. You know, I know that when I came into this awareness of spiritual principles, I was at a desperate place. And I was actually not caring whether I lived or died at that point. But I would have been killing the wrong person had I taken my own life, you know. And I know that there's a lot of youth today who are in exactly that place. And they don't know that all they need to do is hold on. Tomorrow, like you said, will be a better day. You have a practice of getting into bed at 10 o'clock if things are not going well. To me, that's a form of meditation because you give yourself an opportunity to slow down and take a look at what the facts might be, but not necessarily the truth.
Mhm.
Because the truth is the sun will rise in the morning, whether you can see it or not, behind the clouds.
Hold,
So
hold on, hold on. That is my saying. Okay. When I go to the beach because I live on the East Coast, I've been watching sunrises since I was a teenager. And every time we go to the beach, I get up in the morning in time to go watch the sunrise. And one of the things I would always say is the sun came up whether I saw it or not. Thank you.
thank you. Um, does having faith and hope contribute to resilience?
Yes, faith and hope, they can contribute to resilience in this way. And I have faith that I am going to continue to breathe. You know, you were talking about watching the breath and paying attention to the breath. And there's one thing about the breath that is amazing to me is I breathe and I don't even have to think about it. God says breathe, I say okay. And I don't even know that that's happening in the background. Um, but and something else, and I want to say, and I'm getting a little lost because you talked about suicide, and I saw something when I left main campus today. There was a bridge. I was trying to go over the bridge to get to the train station, and you couldn't because the blocked. And I came back across, and this crosses Decatur Street, which is a real busy street, and there's this walkway across there. And I walked up, and there's a sign on both sides of the thing, and it said, "Are you looking for a sign? Well, here's one." And it had the number for the suicide hotline. And I guess students at the end of the road would come to this bridge and think about doing something. And that this sign here just gave me that thing about, hey, it's time to go to bed. It's time to hear a sign. So we talked about breath. I talked about sunrise. I talked about suicide sign. What was the question?
Oh, does faith and hope
Oh,
contribute to?
yeah. Yeah. That question. Okay.
Yes.
Um, I'm gonna go back to Narcotics Anonymous. Our message is hope and the promise. And yes, in order for me to move on, to have resilience, to have perseverance, I have to have hope that it can get better. And a lot of times I don't have hope that it's going to get better, but I'll see people who it's gotten better for. or I'll see people who in a situation don't have it as good as I do. And when I see people who are struggling, that gives me gratitude for where I am. And when I see people who are doing more or doing what I want to do, that gives me hope that I can do that as well. My best friend, we call him Buddha, and not because he's the wisest one, because he's fat and bald, but we call him Buddha. He's a real wise guy anyway. Um, I remember him saying at one point that, and I forget what it was, he said that I inspired him because I worked a corporate job, and he was a bell person at a hotel, you know, and he was a valet, and he has real amazing work ethic. But he said because he saw me working for a corporation that gave him hope, and so he decided that he would go to school at the school I'm at now at Georgia State, and he became a licensed counselor. And he works with men who were incarcerated and who are incompetent to stand trial. And he's an amazing guy, and he helps all kinds of people. And we have this great relationship. But he told me that story because somewhere I was telling the story about, yeah, my best friend Buddha, he went back to college and he became, a therapist. And so because of that, I decided I could go back to college. And then he said, "Nah, you inspired me first." And it just blew me away. It just blew me away. How how it's a circle, how each one help one, each one teach one.
And we pass it on.
Yes, we do.
Yes. We pour love into each other,
Yeah.
and we find new possibilities are available to us.
So
Yeah,
did I answer the question that time?
uh, you came yeah. I said
Okay.
faith and
Okay.
hope. How
All
does
right.
it contribute to resilience?
All right. Good.
And you know, admiring someone and then stepping into that same energy, not
Mhm.
necessarily the same uh, idea, but into that energy. Which brings up another question and observation for me, and that is about creativity. Looking at how when I and we and our youth tap into our creativity, we're really trusting in a power greater than ourselves, and trusting um, that we'll come up with the new manifestations of ourselves and new perceptions of how we could live our lives, and even greater and greater response to not only these principles, but to humanity, and understanding how we are all from the same source. That is something that I've come to believe as a result of practicing spiritual principles, the principles that come out of love, that we all come out of love.
Mm.
And some of us know it, and some
Mm.
of us don't, you know. Um, and when we can really connect with that idea, it transforms the way we relate to each other,
Mhm.
and um, and opens up new opportunities for community. So I think that's the next question. How important is community and connection to
Mm.
resilience?
Mm.
How important?
Okay.
It's
So
having a connection and community.
yes, so resilience leads to community in these ways. I already talked about, when I was younger and Uncle Leroy and those things. But sometimes community is my immediate family or my recovery family or the students here on campus. I'm involved in all these different communities. And we talked about showing up too. And when it's time for class or it's time for family time or it's time to, cut the grass, my service to that community is to show up and be a part of it, and play my part, and I don't have to be the chief bottle washer, but whatever my role is, if I don't show up, then I don't serve the community. Um, that I don't serve my community. And we were talking about each goes in a circle. So there are times when I need the community to support me and to be there for me. I might need $5 or I might need a hug. And if I haven't poured into the community, if I haven't poured into the people around me, then, if I haven't put money in that bank, that emotional bank or that spiritual bank, there's nothing for me to draw from in my community. Um, there's nothing there, or they don't know me. They don't know me. I have people that know me that, I'll be like, yeah, everything's fine. I'm all right. It was like, how you really feel, you know, or how come I haven't heard from you in, X amount of days? Um, I, I need to talk about somebody in my life and who is, uh, her name is Veronica, but we call her Ronnie, Roni. And, she passed away in 2015. I knew her for 30 years before that. Um, and we were best friends. We were married for 15 years. And she was the she was the most outgoing community person that I've ever seen on the planet. Now, my friend Buddha, he's outgoing, but Ronnie was amazing. We would walk into places and I'd be embarrassed because I'm an introvert. And she'd be like, hi, everybody. And hi. Before it was over, she'd be rubbing people's heads and, be embarrassed. And people would look at me and was like, can you get her up? And I'd look at them and I say, better you than me. And she would pour it on. But she never met a person that she didn't pour into, didn't give to, and yes. And so she passed away and sad for me. It was hard for me. But I didn't feel cheated because I had 30 years with her in my life. What a blessing. And I'd go around and, I'd be talking to people. I says, yeah, how's Ronnie doing? And I was like, I know she was sick. And I was like, she passed away. And I would have to console people. Okay. My wife died. And folks would be crying on my shoulder because, because of who she was to them. And like I said, who my dad was to people, who Uncle Leroy was to me. So community, you know, community and it village. Here's another saying for you: it takes a village.
It does take a village. And do we have those villages today? You know, um, we just went through a period called COVID.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And many people decided that they couldn't or wouldn't or um, take part in joining the uh, social revolution in connecting via Zoom and other platforms to continue to stay in community if they were in community before, or connect to community. And as a result of 3 or 4 years of isolation, have turned into, let's just say, very different people than what they were before or could be, as a result of their disconnection
Mhm.
from community. And what I'm noticing is that I had a strong community. I had probably 4 or 5 different communities that I'm connected with through recovery and my spiritual practice and through the various uh, health and social challenges, um, elder groups. Um, I stayed connected. And I also remained to some degree sane during the process. I developed a way to be comfortable in my own space, yet at the same time, I could use cyberspace to make
Yes.
those connections to other communities, and I found it one of the ways that I maintain some degree of sanity. Some people might debate that, but I believe I remained sane, during this experience. But I know other people who suffered,
Mhm.
and some of those people are not here today,
Mhm.
you know, because they made permanent decisions for
Mhm.
an experience that we were having that was transient, that would change. And, this topic, resilience, that we're talking about, I believe directly relates to our willingness and ability to connect to community in such a way that we um, get the support. We
Mhm.
get those words of encouragement. We get the uh, ideas that we may not be able to see on our own. You know, there's a tendency to look at what won't work rather than look at what will. And I'm a witness to that because of my own medical and social issues. You know, um, I know today that as a result of how I saw past pandemics, the HIV pandemic, for instance,
Mhm.
I was able to uh, adjust more readily to the experience with COVID, and I learned some things and didn't know it
Mhm.
until we actually experienced COVID. And so the resilience that I'm seeing expressed in your life and in the lives of so many others who have community, you know, is that we were able to stick and stay. We were able to take advantage of the new opportunities that were making themselves available. We were able to see past the what I can't do and see the things that I could.
Mhm.
And the list of things that I could far outweighed the things that I couldn't, you know. So I'm glad you brought up that point, because I believe that that is something that we don't fully understand how community works and how we're all part of a tapestry.
Mhm. Mhm.
And if we don't see ourselves as part of, then we're one of those single threads off to the side. without getting the support that we need to stay part of that
Mhm.
that cloth, so to speak. Um, I want to talk a little bit about vulnerability as it relates to resilience. Is vulnerability important in developing resilience? Because I think that's what you were pointing at.
Mhm. Yeah, I I think that vulnerability allowed allows me allowed me then and allows me now access to solutions. And for me, a solution is, something's not going well. How can I bounce back? How can I hang in there until until something happens? And so I'll just talk a little bit about vulnerability in that there was a time 20 something years ago when I found out I was HIV positive. I didn't want anybody to know. I didn't want to walk into any place that had AIDS on the door. I didn't even walk into a place where people knew that people with AIDS went. Um, and then, the fact that I'm in recovery, what happens for me is I'll be in situations. I'm an Uber driver, right? And I I am in so many situations. I call it like Uber church. People will get in and they'll be going through something, and they'll be going through something, and then all of a sudden, we'll just start talking about stuff, and every time, not every time, but eventually it happens. In some of these conversations, eventually there comes a time where my little spiritual antenna that's down here, in my gut, okay, Barry, it's time to disclose. It's time to have this conversation. It's time to share with this person and to be real open and honest. And what happens by doing that is there is this exchange between us. I get something, I give something. And we both, in many cases, have walked away from the situation. I look back as they're getting out and I'm like, I'm so glad you got in today. And they're like, I'm so glad we talked today. So being able to be vulnerable and back to honesty, being able to be vulnerable. And I don't tell everybody what's going on. It's a case by case situation. And because of my relationship with you, I was able to open it up and talk about my HIV status and my status in recovery. Felt like a safe space. And if the space doesn't feel safe, then I just kind of go on business as usual, love as usual. And then that moment comes and I have to open up and be vulnerable. And I'm a guy, so I'm a guy that cries at movies. I'm a guy that will feel sad about something and well up you know, and just my niece and my sister used to tease me about crying all the time, you know. And, my thing is I'd rather be crying than drinking.
Mhm. Do you think love inspires vulnerability? I hear you talking about you feel it
Mm, mm,
when
yeah.
to disclose.
Hmm.
You'll be in a conversation and something will trigger.
Hmm.
It will suggest
Hmm.
that you speak up. What do you call that?
Well, now that you've called it love, I stand in agreement with you because That's interesting. That's interesting because it, it is that feeling of not necessarily love as a word, but feeling love or feeling loved despite what's going on in the world, being cared about, being protected. I have a friend, I haven't spoken to her in a whole bunch of years, but while we were together, she would say, "You have favor," and I didn't know what she was talking about. But I've had a string of the universe opening up over the last 6 months, and and I'm like, oh, I see what she means by have favor. I have grace. I have favor. I have someone that loves me and that looks out for me. And that time I went to buy drugs in that neighborhood and they pulled a gun on me and somebody else ended up dead and I didn't. You know, something's been looking out for me for some reason so that I could be here and I could be now. Um, I could be, I could be. And so yes, I think love, being loved, feeling loved is real important um, to my ability to bounce back. My ability to persevere, and you know, and and I have a network of people, and when I feel bad, there are people I can call, and when I get off the phone with them, I know that I know that I know that I am loved.
So how do you know when to disclose to someone else? Or do you?
It's a feeling, but not but it's a feeling, and there's a feeling of I'm loved and I'm protected, and on the other side of that, there's this feeling that something good might come out of this disclosure. I said it earlier in the conversation was and this comes out of Alcoholics Anonymous, and it's one of the promises. No matter how far down on the scale I've gone, I will see how my experience will benefit others. And if I can't, if people don't know that you can be an addict, you can be an alcoholic and recover, just don't know. I had a cousin that was shooting heroin when I was a kid, and I didn't know. He went to jail, and they told me he went to summer camp. you know, but had I known the trials that he was going through, I may have made another choice. I might not have, but so it's just a matter of I feel that I can make a difference here, and I can. It doesn't mean I always do. It doesn't mean it always works, but I feel like there's this obligation I have to, to give back, and that's another thing about the 12 steps is having had this spiritual awakening. It's my responsibility to carry this message or to carry a message or to give hope, and faith to someone else, to reach back and pull somebody forward with me. So I don't know. I just kind of know. I just kind of know, and I am loved and I trust.
And that's another um, way that I think um, opens up the opportunity to share something that might help somebody move through uh, circumstances and situations that they may be facing today. You know, it. How many people um, could we save if we were able to check in with those who are contemplating suicide or um, being overwhelmed by some loss or even, you know, in situations where they have manifested great amounts of money or property, you know, and really don't understand, you know, how to live in under those circumstances. But the word that came to my mind was intuitively,
Mm.
we will know
Okay. Okay.
what to do, you
Yeah.
know, especially when another person shows up who absolutely needs to know that there's a way out. There's a way out of the madness.
Mm.
There's a way out of the despair. There's a way out of that idea of lack and limitation. There's a way out of fear. You know,
There is.
those, that's the gift that we who are in recovery can give to others. And that's something that they can't give to themselves necessarily. You know, it takes a village. Once again, you know, we can apply that to the family, but we can expand that idea. I know I have into the community around me, and I absolutely know when to speak up and when not to.
Yeah, I like your word intuition, and you talked about how we can help others, and we don't know how many. And there's a saying. I love my sayings and my slogans. You know, Harriet Tubman said, "I could have freed so many more slaves had they known they were slaves."
Yes. Yes, we can become accustomed to almost anything,
Mhm.
familiar with almost anything, and not know that freedom. What did Bob Marley say? None but ourselves can
Yes,
free us from mental slavery.
free ourselves from mental slavery.
Don't even know.
Redemption song. That's right.
Yeah. Yes. Okay. Can humor, play, and recreation be a tool for building resilience?
Can humor and recreation, you say?
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Humor,
Okay. Well,
play, and recreation.
yes. Oh, humor, play. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So that there's a saying, don't take yourself so seriously. You know, and when I can look at what I've done, or I can look at what's going on, and I can have a jovial, happy, positive attitude about it, and I can say, that was pretty dumb, Barry, and laugh about it as opposed to judge about it, then that's a pathway. Um, it's a pathway. And and by playing, you know, I'm I'm a big kid. I like to play, and I like to, I like children, and I'm the kind of guy that, I'll get on the floor and play with cars, or, that kind of thing. And, that gives me access, that vulnerability gives me the access, um, to be able to, to be kind of, I say, childlike, and children are inquisitive, they're open, they're open to new things. And if I have a closed mind and I think the only solution to something is A or B, and I'm not willing to be open and to play, you know, vulnerable, and find out that, oh, there's an option C, and then there's an option none of the above. you know. So, so yeah, that's that's play and recreation and fun and
How
laughter.
does, how does resilience relate to finding your purpose in life? It seems that you found your
Mm,
purpose. How has resilience contributed to finding
okay.
your purpose? And how can others?
Yeah. I have to go back to, the 60s and when I was growing up and I was a kid, born in 59. So, the March on Washington, I was a kid. And those old spirituals, we shall overcome someday. And by knowing that we shall overcome, by knowing that there's this thing, this space called overcoming, for me, that is the resilience in it. And, I saw people locked arms walking in the middle of the street, police lined up on both sides, and the whole chorus, we shall overcome. So, resilience, overcoming.
I can see that. Not only were they locked arm in arm, they had a line of police in front of them with fire hoses
Mm,
and police dogs that they
mhm.
unleashed on these same people who were marching peacefully down the middle of the street. And in a way, that was what moved
Mhm.
the minds and hearts of the people who were totally oblivious, just like with George Floyd.
Yeah.
Some people were waking up for the very first time to what the experience is of their own countrymen and women.
Yeah. Television was as big a catalyst as the people being hurt on television for America to get a good look at themselves. You um, yeah, and so the lady who or the young girl who filmed the George Floyd murder made that possible because that stuff has been going on. Malcolm X. They've been complaining about police brutality for a long time, and America said, "Oh, it's not going on." And now we have body cams, we have surveillance everywhere, and we've got everybody with their phone up like this. And I got a problem with that too. If somebody's getting beat down, probably not going to just film it. I'm going to try to do something, you know, or I hope I would. Let me put it that way. I hope I would. But you'll see people, especially like at concerts, right? This amazing artist is on stage, and I'm not listening. I'm not, I am filming, and because I'm a film student, my perspective is I can be on this side of the camera or on that side of the camera. I can't be on both. I can't experience it and film it at the same time. I just can't do it. I just can't. I just can't get the full experience of what's going on. And there are times when I miss the shot. I want to feel it here, you know, not share it on Facebook.
Is there such a thing as too much resilience?
Not in my opinion. No. Well, I, I say no, but sometimes I've got to let go of things, and the resilience of where I am in my life is to move forward as opposed to trying to hold on to some things um, somewhere too. So that's another one of my sayings. I, I heard this early on in Washington, D.C., in a Narcotics Anonymous meeting. And this lady said, and I repeat this very often: God, thank you for all the things you've given me. God, thank you for all the things you've taken away. And God, thank you for all the things that are left. So sometimes the resilience is to acknowledge what's left and focus to what's next, and and embrace and enjoy and appreciate who's here.
So, for instance, in the case of George Floyd
Mhm.
and the camera,
Mhm.
can being too resilient
Mhm.
be a harmful thing?
So you're saying in the case of George Floyd being resilient, yeah, is that
And
correct?
the person behind the camera.
And the person behind the camera. You know, I think that's a case by case, moment by moment situation, because there are certain situations where intuitively a person knows it's okay to film that situation, or intuitively, person knows get up and run, or intuitively a person knows let me jump in and help this person. So I think those things happen on a case by case basis, but I do I do prescribe to the theory that things happen for a reason, and it was that person's destiny to film, and it was George Floyd's destiny to spark a movement. Yeah, the way that Martin Luther King sparked a movement. Well, the people around him, but during that time, because I think that in Black History Month, if we quote "I have a dream," we say that that's what civil rights was all about. But um, civil rights was, and this is something about me, and we talk about community. I want to go back to this. And Martin Luther King was not a sanitation worker, but he worked and marched alongside of the sanitation workers. Martin Luther King didn't take the bus, but he boycotted and stood by those who took the bus. So I am an advocate for all people, no matter what their plight, no matter what they're going through, and that's from an example that I got from one of the other people at the March on Washington. One of my other favorite stories to tell, and I won't tell it. So I live in Atlanta, and I live in the district where John Lewis was my congressman. And I would go to Washington every year. I did this for about 5, 6 years. And then, of course, we took the pandemic off. But I would go to his office and I would sit down to him and we would talk about the importance of healthcare and and he was an ally. It was a great meeting every time going to his office. Whereas I would go to some other offices and they would, you know, be negative about, well, why should I give money to this and give money to that? And, why don't I just keep all the money? And why do we need to spend on this and that? But this goes back to my mother. And there's a picture on the wall. And I have a picture with me and John Lewis, and we're standing next to each other. And where this picture is, there's a picture of the March on Washington. And, Martin Luther King standing there giving the I Have a Dream speech. And I acknowledged that picture. And I said, he said, this is my favorite picture. And I acknowledged, I said, yeah. And I said, well, we were kids and we stayed home with Uncle Leroy and we watched the March on Washington on television. And my mother got on a bus in New Jersey and she went to Washington to the March on Washington. And John Lewis said to me, he looked at me, he said, tell your mother thank you for her service. Here I'm looking at somebody who, for me, was a hero. He was up on the wall of fame, and all that. And what I took away from that, he didn't say this in these words. What I took away from that was that if somebody's given a speech, there has to be someone there to listen. And if a tree falls in the forest, or if a speech falls on the nation's capital, and there's nobody there to listen, is it going to make a sound? Is it going to start a movement?
I like that. I'm also hearing that resilience may not actually be a constant, but adaptable to the circumstances and situations that may be presenting themselves.
Yeah, if that's a question, I got a real short answer for this one. Yes. It's adaptable, and resilience comes in a lot of flavors.
Mm-hmm. And changes over time. Would you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And resilience for me gets easier. I remember, so I use resilience because my brother, at one time, he said I was resilient. And I remember I was a DJ and I was supposed to be doing this prom that night. And I went outside in the front of the house and somebody stole my Jeep and my trailer full of equipment.
Wow.
And I remember talking to my mother that morning and telling her about it. And she told my brother about it. And my brother said, I heard this through the grapevine. My brother said, oh, Barry's resilient. He'll figure it out. And I called up some people I knew who had equipment. And, thankfully my music wasn't gone, but I had the music was house, and we went out and somebody had lights and somebody, we all got together and we pulled off this prom. And those students had no idea that somebody stole my Jeep that morning and all my equipment was gone. So resilience said, go do this prom. These kids don't know. This is their one time, and this is their one time to have their prom. I was too distraught to go to my prom. I didn't think I needed to. Yeah, maybe I didn't. Maybe I didn't need to. But anyway, that was that flavor of resilience for that day. And I hang on to that word because that's how my brother sees me.
So, Barry, I'm aware of the time. And
okay.
Like I said to you before we got started, that this was going to be a little bit more than half an hour that you thought we might be speaking.
You told me 2 hours, and man, and this is before you end, I do want to say this. Thank you so much for your trust and your love and for asking me to come here and do this. I didn't know I needed to do this, but I needed to do this. And
I'm
now
so
I know.
happy you made yourself available to do it, even under the circumstances. I won't go into all of the things that made it possible for you to be here today, but I
That's
feel
right.
the DJ equipment was being stolen and
Yeah, it
showed
was.
up anyway.
Yeah. And now my battery is telling me that this conversation is going to be over anyway. You know,
Right?
this is amazing. Yeah.
But if there is anything that you'd like to say to the people that would hear this conversation, especially our youth,
Mhm.
um, what advice would you give our youth and or the people in our community who will hear this? How can resistance during these times relieve stress and hopefully um, open up opportunities for us to deal with the chaos and confusion that is part of our experience right now?
Mhm. So, yeah, I would say first, put your phone down and be with people around you. Like I said, I drive Uber and I come to a lot of corners and there's a homeless person with a sign over there. And I keep a cup with coins in it. And oftentimes, if they ask for it, I'll give them exactly what they asked for. And I got a couple of dollars in there. But what I always give them is I look them in the eyes. I let them know that I see you. I know that you're human. I send them love through me. And so, what I'm suggesting is see each other, respect each other, have empathy for each other. And I want to end with a quote, me in a quote that I heard from a meditation teacher a long time ago. And it says, battery server is on. Please plug in. It's with great respect and with great love. I welcome you all with all my heart.
Thank you, Mary, for being so open and so willing to share parts of your life. And I am so grateful for this moment and the moments to come when the space is made for us to reconnect in person. I remember your wife,
Absolutely. Yes. I know
and I
you do.
remember the love,
Yeah.
you know, and I'm so grateful that I had an opportunity to connect on
Mhm.
that level as well. Um, well, with
My
that,
friend, I love you. Thank you.
I love you too. Have a good evening.
All right. Ashe.
And so it is. Thank you for listening. I'm grateful for the opportunity to give you an insight into how we may practice these principles in such a way that freedom comes to each of us. It's a commitment that I hope each of you can make to this practice that I know has set me and others free from the chaos and the confusion. Thanks for listening.